Hi, so this is part 3 of revising Princess of the Infinite. So this is where I left off. Stanek struck her fingers across a plate of the metal door and a large chest lifted slowly to a touch. Using ProWritingAid, I've got several reports open right now, complex paragraphs, etc. But the main thing I'm focusing on is grammar and spelling and the style score, which covers quite a few different things. So if I can improve on those, hopefully it'll make for a better reading experience. So this is kind of where I was up to. She opened up the blanket, flopped the cloth, spread her arms wide. It's warm in here. Danim's warm-blooded. Yeah, okay. Can I touch him? She looked into his eyes, squinting, screwing up her face. Can I touch you? She's talking about a giant beast in the room. We need to get you up there. Stanek pointed towards the mountainous body. I can't climb, Stephanie confessed. Stanek shook her head. There's nothing you can't do. Stephanie rolled her eyes. So that's just suggested a full stop there as a comma splice. Help me up, I'm serious. I suck at climbing. Then 70 feet of neck creaked and groaned into life. 2 lips pursed carefully around the Glaudium weave, and Stephanie was hoisted onto the back of the beast of the void. I could change that to... yeah, the beast of the void. And the beast of the void hoisted Stephanie onto, and it is a he, kind of, because it's Danim Precious, onto his back. Okay, so that gets rid of the passive voice there. It didn't suggest a change, it just said that it was passive voice. Yeah. Yep. There you go. Okay, several little changes there. I have been copying and pasting across to Word, but right now I'm just going to keep on editing, and I'll copy and paste everything after, so I can keep this in a larger screen with the font larger. You're bigger than I imagined, her voice quavered. I am nothing. Stephanie tilted back her head under the cloth and tried to mimic what she heard, her throat hurting as she reached for the correct guttural and glottal acrobatics. I'm Stephanie. Dissatisfied, she tried again, gurgling the words. I am nothing. She wiped her drool on the back of her hand. 2 heads breathed out together, the muscles of his back arching over Stephanie's head. You are... so it's suggesting here removing the space before the ellipses, which I've been doing throughout. The unwritten path, you are the celestial plan for those without hope. Once they would say that when a soul passed, a star would be born. In the undrawn, and I am leaving that because that is a concept within the book. In the unknown, such a star may be. She lay down flat, pressing her ear to his strangely smooth skin. Parts of him with smooth at least. Just adding a comma there. She guessed overall he was anything but smooth. It's suggesting a semicolon there because it's a comma splice. She guessed overall he was anything but smooth. I guess it just doesn't need a comma. She guessed overall he was anything but smooth, but right. She guessed overall he was... yeah, she guessed overall he was anything but smooth, but yeah, so it was suggesting removing that, which I was reading it without that anyway. She guessed overall he was anything but smooth, but right where she lay, he was smooth. She waited for him to elaborate on his proclamation, pretty pleased with where he was going with it. Go on. Remove the space for the ellipses. Keep wanting to say triple dots. You will be hailed. They will exalt you. Stephanie, the princess of the infinite. She giggled. Shut up. He went on. I'm going to ignore the passive voice there. I'm just going to tell it to ignore that so it doesn't keep bringing it up. And my passive voice score is pretty low on this anyway. It's a lot lower than it was on the first book, so I'm actually not going to really worry about passive voice. I might just turn it off, but we'll see. Shut up, he went on. I dreamed once, and in that dream I saw a single thread. You see the tapestry. You saw the whole of the moon. You know the warp and the weft of it. I saw one thread and thought myself a god. How strange it must feel to see so much more. She moved her cheek, stretching her hands out, wishing that he could see her dream. Guard your dream, young princess. For now, suggesting, I will be your god, but I grow weary of this form. Too long with thoughts that ebb and flow with the tides, my bloods boil for one man's downfall. Stephanie patted her hand gently. Stephanie patted her hand gently. She shouted to Stanek, "You coming up?" Her voice responded from somewhere far below. "Danum is not a horse, Spiff." Tiernan ached for this. Sorry, I've got a cat distracting me here. He's trying to come up and jump on the desk. Tiernan ached for this. It had been more than a century since he had encountered real combat. Actual combat. Is that more? Is that stronger? It had been a century since he had encountered actual combat. Yeah, okay. I'll go with that suggestion. There was so much energy. Most of the troops had chosen to forgo. Most of the troops had forgone, yes, any concession to the fact that there would be cameras watching. The most fearsome of them twitched and jostled, their ferocious teeth on display, their eyes wild with hunger, their musculature barely constrained by the ballistic armour. Those were the blood bastards who had stalked people's nightmares for centuries gone, giving rise to wild tales and dreaded titles. Tiernan always revelled in the glory of a good title. He watched the soldiers load onto 3 Learjet heavy transports with 2 armoured transports on board each aircraft. It would be cramped. Yep, that's fine. It would be cramped, but having the support of the .50 caliber machine guns would be a comfort. It's suggesting compound word there and removing a space there. No, that should have a... having the support of the .50 caliber machine guns would be a comfort. He stepped onto the tail ramp of the lead vehicle and walked down the narrow aisle, spelled incorrectly, between the troops. There was no rallying cry. Tuan had been exacting in the brief. No prisoners, no survivors. The walls of the chamber began to tremble. Just trembled. Yes. Started to. This is something I do really frequently. The walls of the chamber trembled as Danum moved, the huge ceiling canopy folding up on itself, the tunnel above barely visible to Stephanie's eyes. The beast reared up, and Stephanie tumbled backwards into Stanek's arms. But Stanek was ready with her fingers dug deep into the flesh. Danum's back. Possible missing preposition. The flesh. Yeah, that is right. The flesh of Danum's back. There you go. Deep into the flesh of Danum's back, the leeches bonding her to him. 2 house-sized claws reached up, grappling with the coarse stone of the tunnel. Stephanie felt the rush of warm air on her face as he lifted. I'm going to get rid of the felt there. So the warm air rushed over. The warm air. As he lifted. Okay, so that's just gotten rid of the felt. The warm air rushed over the skin of Stephanie's face as he lifted, dragging himself upwards. I have, in the previous book, like 100 and odd or 200 and odd instances of the word felt, so I'm just trying to get that down to about 30 in this one, which I already know I've already done an overused word check, and I know I'm in around about the same margin, so I'm trying to get rid of instances of felt. The warm air rushed over the skin of Stephanie's face as he lifted, dragging himself upwards. "We're going to wreck the house?" Stephanie shrieked, half excited, half petrified by the thought of the house collapsing on them. "We're not directly under the house. This passage curves back on itself," Stanek spoke close to Stephanie's ear. Dust and debris fell on the 2 riders as Danum's giant claws scraped at the stone, carving long furrows as they went. Stephanie coughed, squeezing her eyes tightly shut. Full stop, comma, splice. I can't breathe. Don't then, Stanek yelled. Let the delvers do their work. Just close your mouth. Just kind of telling her that she doesn't have to breathe because she's Leechborn. She tried. She closed her mouth and hummed, so desperate to burst into song now that she had the tune to Little People in her head. Even knowing that she should be able to go without breathing, she couldn't convince herself, so she wrapped the glaudium tight around her face. She could see enough through the cloth. The tunnel above swaying wildly as she was jostled and jolted by the motion of Danim's muscles. Again, I'm leaving the passive voice there. The beast turned, clinging easily to the roof of the cave as it transitioned towards a flat passage. Stephanie slipped, her hands thrashing wildly for a finger hold as her body dangled. She managed to grasp. Nope, she grasped. She grasped hold of Stanek's neck, clinging tightly, pressing her cloth-covered face against the back of Stanek's hand. Danim corkscrewed about the tunnel until he was upright, barreling with great speed now. Stephanie swung wildly out to the side, her arms stronger than she had realized. She adjusted her grip, but her fingers somehow found their way to Stanek's mouth. What's wrong with that? Oh, she. Okay, so I've used she several times. Her fingers found their way to Stanek's mouth as she adjusted her grip. Yeah, I'll go with that. She couldn't let go, so she held on fast, one hand at Stanek's neck, the other with her fingers hooked over Stanek's bottom teeth. She could hear Stanek's laughter over her own scream. Then, finally, her body smacked down onto the surface of Danim's back. Her fingers found their way to Stanek's mouth as she adjusted her grip. Yeah, it's fine. I think there was a little bit more comedy to the phrasing initially, but I don't know. When the beast finally came to rest, Stephanie rested her head on Stanek's back and let out an exhausted whimper. I'm sorry. Stanek released her grip and turned to face the child. What are you sorry for? Stephanie laughed and wiped her fingers on the glaudium. I had my fingers in your mouth. Oh, that, Stanek raised her eyebrows. You couldn't help it. He's fast. Stephanie nodded. He's scary. I'm glad he's on our side. Stanek pointed down the length of his body. It's just doing the comma splice is just getting rid of the commas and changing the full stops. See his wings? Gasping, Stephanie leaned over and craned her neck. I don't see them. Should be a full stop there, yeah, or a comma. Full stop. Stanek shuffled closer to Stephanie, leaning the head. Stanek shuffled closer to Stephanie, leaning their heads together and pointing at the long flap of leathery hide. Full stop. He can't really fly with them, but when you see him with his wings spread wide, that's scary. Okay. West had been a little surprised when he'd heard Stanek use the word barracks. The thought of Stanek stocking up with armaments and ammo was ludicrous. When he had opened the door to the next room, her words had made sense. So it just changed that from started to make sense to had made sense. The space read more like a more bizarre wing of a natural history museum. They were greeted by the sight of two long aisles of skeletal animals. The sight of two long lines of skeletal animals greeted them, their bones pieced together. Would that read better? They were greeted by the sight of... No, that's fine. They were greeted by the sight of two long lines of skeletal animals, their bones pieced together in odd assemblages. He walked over to the nearest, stroking the tiger skull, his fingertips dipping over the curve of the frontal lobe into the orbit. The skull sat atop the skeletal torso of a great ape, but the bones of the ape's arms terminated in long hooked claws. Yeah, ended is fine. Tasteful, Charlene commented, a little appalled by what she saw. They're not real, West replied. They're casts. Walking towards a human-deer hybrid, David's face screwed up in confusion. What's the point? Think of them as muses, West suggested. He looked around, searching for the refrigerated coolers he knew must be there somewhere. Hithnatan eth duro, he thought, muses and meat. In the great battlefields of the mythologue, that was... So I'm going to add to the dictionary, so it doesn't keep trying to spell check that. Hithaneth Duro, he thought, muses and meat, in the great battlefields of the mythologue, that was how barracks were stocked. That's how they stocked barracks. That was how they stocked barracks, yeah. He caught sight of them between the tree trunk bones of a mammoth, the side walls of the room lined with walk-in coolers. Sorry, I can't read. Cobb stalked off further into the room, his eyes drawn to a large feline body which had been merged with a bull's skull. Stanek makes these? Question. Cobb. Yeah, it's Cobb's question. Sorry, I lost track of where I was. West pulled open the doors of the coolers, splice, it's getting rid of that. I don't know, probably it's a lost art. Cobb laughed. West pulled open a cooler. It just needs to be a cooler. Cobb laughed. Some things are meant to be lost. Not some things are lost. This isn't Lord of the Rings. He ran his hands over the bull's horns. Full stop. So, muses for what? Charlene remembered her first morning with the leeches, the fitness instructor, the bathroom mirror, and all the changes. So it doesn't, just getting rid of the of. All the changes she had undergone. So again, I've got 3 occurrences of she in a row. She stared at the tiger skull which West had touched. She had seen at least some small part of a battle of the mythologue on the hopper. She moved closer, leaning in so that she could examine the teeth and the elongated jaw. Even the size of the skull didn't seem like it would be too much of a challenge. No, she understood what West meant. The Delvers understood. She pushed her jaw forward, feeling her lower canine teeth pressing into the flesh of her upper lip. So they're using these fused skeletons, to find inspiration to change their own form, and that's what Charlene started to do here. West returned to the centre of the room, heaving a large carcass in his wake. He dropped it on the floor between the 2 rows of skeletal abominations. Full stop. You know that fennec fox you were talking about? I'm going to leave that because he's referring to another conversation. You know that fennec fox you were talking about, and he's talking about Cobb. Cobb smiled broadly. I'm going to leave these 3 she's because it's, in the scope of that paragraph, I don't think it's too much of a problem. She stared at the tiger skull. She'd seen one. Yeah, it's not horrendous. West returned to the centre of the room, heaving the mass. Cobb smiled broadly. Well, West went on, these muses are like your fennec fox. He pointed towards the mammoth skeleton. There's nothing special in this room. There's nothing in this room that is beyond you. He walked over to another muse, patting the thing on the spinal column. The only thing that stands between you in your current form and Cobb, the bare-headed antelope, is time and food. He shoved the carcasses with the toe of his shoe. I don't know how much time we have, but the pantry is full. Again, 3 he's. What's it suggesting here? The toe of his shoe was used to shove the carcasses. That's just, yes, it's fixing the problem with he, but it makes it a really wordy sentence. Pointed towards the mammoth skeleton. Sorry, Cat is playing distraction tactics right now. Hey. I don't know whether to do anything about these right now or just leave them. I think the fact that it's 3 he's after a paragraph with 3 she's is probably more of a problem for me. He walking over to the... Yes, that does increase the ing beginnings, but I'm pretty low on them right now. Where's my ing starts? I'm still at 0%, so that's okay. Walking over to another muse, patting the thing on the spinal. He patted. The thing on the spinal column, the only thing that stands between you and your current form. He shoved the carcass with the toe of his shoe. Yeah, okay. David's nostrils flared as he looked at the meat. I can't eat that, Wes shrugged. There's other food in there, shelves full of bratwurst, cooked chickens and cheeses. Charlene turned to face the others and opened her mouth, holding up her hands. David froze rigid. Rigidly? David froze rigidly. Okay. Charlene's face was wrong. He tried to articulate the thought, but he kept coming back to the same word, just wrong. Her mouth was pushed forward, her teeth showing under lips spread too thin. I'm going to ignore the passive. Her teeth showing underneath lips spread too thin. She had spent little thought on her nose, which was still essentially a nose, but the cartilage of the bridge had extended with her mouth, so her nostrils were pushed wide. That mouth, though, David couldn't take his eyes off her teeth. He looked at the tiger skull and realised that her teeth were sharper, coming to dagger-like points. All of them. Then he noticed her hands, or rather, he saw that her hands had become something much more frightening than her teeth. They weren't remotely human, or even vaguely feline. Two large hook-like claws that extended several inches beyond where David imagined her fingers would have to come. Raw! She tried to shout the word, but it was almost impossible to properly enunciate. Split infinitive. To enunciate properly. But it was almost impossible to enunciate properly the rhotic consonant, so it just came out as a protracted yaw. Wes clapped his hands together in elation. There, he patted Cobb's back. You see now? The muses. He looked at Charlene's body, which had understandably lost some of its mass. He walked over and hugged her, her claws digging awkwardly into his back. Now you need to eat. So, she's just turned herself into some kind of tiger cum. I don't know what those were. There was a prehistoric thing that had like hook claws. I can't remember what they're called. Anyway, so now she has to eat to replace the muscle mass she's used to make that transformation. Stephanie felt the change in Danham. Okay, felt. Stephanie felt the change in Danham, the heat rising, the muscles of his back flexing. One felt. It's okay. Just one. I'm going to allow myself up to 30. I'll go back through and do the overused word check at the end, but I'm going to have to say I'm okay with that one right now. Stephanie felt the change in Danham, the heat rising, the muscles of his back flexing. He could hear them somewhere up there. She felt his want. Okay, this is two felts in one paragraph. She knew his want. She saw it, the disembodied manifestation of his desire moving out ahead of him with reckless abandon. But he waited, because through the child he could see. Patience was its own reward. He beheld as each impulsive form bled on the unseen battlefield of an unwoven world. Patience. So she's seeing the future, essentially, and through him, through her, he, Danham, the beast, is seeing the future. So he's using her to see what's coming, and he's being patient because of it. When the drone strike started above them, cracks crazed the walls around them. The surrounding walls. The earth groaned worryingly. Patience. Does time really speed up when you get older? Stephanie asked, because she knew that if anyone could answer it, it would be Stanek. Stanek stroked the debris of Stephanie's hair. Time is whatever you make of it. Surprised by her answer, Stephanie glanced over her shoulder. Aunt Hannah says the same thing. She must be pretty smart then. Stephanie nodded. Super smart. The tunnel shook again, rubble tumbling about Danham's claws far below. I wish Aunt Han was here, Stephanie admitted, knuckling her eyes as she blinked away the dust. Before Stanek could answer, Stephanie went on, I know she couldn't be here. I mean, I haven't seen her. I don't think she ever came along with us. Stanek smiled. It's not really safe here. Her wording there is to do with the fact that she's seeing multiple versions of time at the same time. So she knows that there's no version of what's happened to her where Hannah's there. Stanek smiled. It's not really safe here. Stephanie rolled her eyes. Full stop. We're fine. She patted a scaly outcrop of Danham's back, then leaned on her side, resting her head, listening to the rolling thunder of drone strikes. Stephanie closed her eyes. Are you married? Well, Stephanie, that's a complicated question. I don't think so, Stephanie corrected her, certain that she understood at least this much about the workings of the world. Stanek thought about the many vows she had made and broken over the thousands of years of her life. There was no easy way to explain it to a 7-year-old, so she settled for a half-truth. I'm not married anymore, no. Stephanie sighed, satisfied that she was in the company of wisdom. I don't think I'll ever get married. For 20 minutes the conversation meandered, punctuated by the thunderous noise of drone strikes above. So many important questions: favourite colours, books, films, princesses, food. Stanek enjoyed answering. It was a rare opportunity to chisel herself in stone for that one moment in time defined by a child's perspective. When the bombing pattern seemed to reach a crescendo, Stephanie sat upright and handed the Glaudium weave to Stanek, then held her arms over her head. It's time. Stanek nodded. So it is. She wrapped the cloth about Stephanie. Unnecessary comma. She wrapped the cloth about Stephanie around her waist twice, allowing some of the material to drop in swags. Into swags, before collecting both ends of the train up and passing it up over her shoulders. She pulled the two ends of the cloth around Stephanie's neck, then she pulled the rest of the material down Stephanie's back, tucking it through the loop tucking it through the loop she had made about her waist. Stephanie's arms fell down to her sides. She thanked Stanek and hugged her. Then the two of them crouched low, holding tight onto whatever handholds they could find in Danham's tough skin. Danham reared up, clawing at the rock overhead. There wasn't far to climb. He bored a hole all about him, careful of his precious cargo. He would guard the child and her dream. Up through the soil, pushing forward now towards the sounds of the engines and the footsteps, up through the ruins of the house, scooping aside tons of masonry with each claw. Levelling off, he raised up on his rear haunches, waiting, because Danham had seen. This was supposed to be Tienan's moment. This was the start of Tienan's great war against humanity, and out of the ashes, the birth of a true religion for the masses. Worship him and be spared. Again, that's passive voice, but it's kind of semi-religious speak. Tienan had given them all a spectacle to behold, a resurrection for the modern age. Well, Danham could hardly blame him for that. He had learned from the best. Born of Alum, raised on the Book of Antrusca, Tienan had grown up with that image of resurrection, but surely hadn't everyone. Even Danham had grown up with a belief in the rebirth of the Lenoran, the architects of the continents, and before Lenoran there was the Yuntanan. Why do I write words I can't say? Add to dictionary. Yuntanan, and on and on. These people were no different. Resurrection was nothing new to them. Time to give them something new. Stephanie watched, detached from the reality which lay before her, because it was only a fragment of what there was to see. She felt Danham's consciousness, his bristling awareness of this new world. She felt the ground beneath him and the cool of the soil as his claws dug their colossal trenches. He heard something overhead, but Stephanie looked up to the sky and saw nothing. In that moment, there was such a surge of malevolent joy from Danham. Malevolence wasn't an emotion that Stephanie was familiar with. It rose in her, warm and absorbing, and in an attempt to expunge that new feeling from a range of emotion, she thought about Hannah, and she smiled. In an attempt to expunge... Yes, and to expunge that new feeling. Hannah, and she smiled. Get up. Danham heard a command, but still he waited. There's a little bit of echoing going on here, because at the end of the first book, Hannah is watching the TV and seeing this happening. So this is all like the hour leading up to the end of the first book that was deliberately kind of crushed. Antoine's orders. On Antoine's order, the learn to talk. Antoine's order, the battalion broke off into platoons of 30 men and women marching in tightly regimented groups. He was front and centre and proud of it. He didn't believe in leading from the rear. If he moved, his soldiers would follow. If he died, there were another 40 men and women who had fought on the fields of the mythologue. On. What's its problem with on? In. Who had fought in the fields. Yeah, okay. There were another 40 men and women who had fought in the fields of the mythologue, and each of them were more than ready to step up. Dying didn't seem likely. The estate was thoroughly demolished. That's true. And passive voice is okay there. They had hit the site so hard with the drone strikes that it had started to feel that it had felt like an earthquake. Started to feel. I might leave that one instance of had started to feel like an earthquake. Now there was just rubble. His platoon crossed the line of shrubs which bordered what was left of the driveway. Again, I'm ignoring that passive voice. His heart began to race. His heart raced, yes. Then a couple of seconds later, he started to feel unsteady on his feet. Feel unsteady on his feet. His legs became unsteady. His footing became unsteady. His footing became unsteady. His eye line keeling off to one side. Keeling is the right word. I'm going to ignore that. Right, his platoon crossed the line of shrubs which bordered what was left of the driveway. His heart raced. Then a couple of seconds later, his footing became unsteady, his eye line keeling off to one side, the horizon tilting. He reached out and grabbed the shoulder of the woman to his left, Lieutenant Cadel Royce. She held her right hand up toward her face, then pointed towards the ruins with her index finger, adding to the dictionary. Toan followed the line of a finger, and he saw, just a glimpse, the solitary child standing in the wreck. Then either side of her, perhaps 40 feet apart, the two heads lifted from the ruins, one all scales and teeth, the other flashing a razor-sharp beak, its large wide eyes facing forward, piercing black set in rings of gold. He lost sight of the child, hidden by the hulking mass as the beast finally pushed up out of the ground, no comma there. There was the answer, the heart racing, the unease, the distant dread. There was the earthquake, the nightmare, the threat of oblivion. The beast unfurled its wings, and the wind was so strong that the outermost platoon struggled to stay on their feet. It was unthinkable. He wondered if Tiernan had known, but he supposed that even he wouldn't have. He supposed even he wouldn't have been stupid enough to bring so small a force to bear on a beast of the void. They had 20 platoons, 6.50 caliber machine gunners and the drones. He looked down the line towards Tienan's platoon and saw that Tienan was running across the lawn towards him. Clearly he hadn't known. There was a gust of wind, the beast rearing up further, pushing out of the rubble with its hind legs. Then it plunged forward, its claws slamming into the earth, not 40 feet from the front line of the platoons. The earth split, the driveway cracking and buckling. These were sure-footed men and women, and many of them stumbled. Tienan hurtled over a jagged ramp of concrete, sliding to home in front of Tuan. "We need to leave," Tuan yelled. Tienan shook his head, his eyes filled with fury, splice. "There are cameras on us. We need to take out its legs, feast on his carcass, and pickle his heads in brine." He looked behind him. How did she get her hands on a beast of the void? Tuan unhooked his satellite phone from his hip, called in the orders to the rear gunners. He grabbed Tienan's arms before he had a chance to return to his platoon. He grabbed Tienan's arm before he had a chance to return to the platoon. Before he returned, he grabbed Tienan's arm, so he's stopping Tienan from returning to his platoon. He grabbed Tienan's arm before he returned to his platoon. "Did you see the girl?" "Girl? You saw Stanek?" Tuan shook his head. "Up there," he pointed. "There's a little girl riding him." Tienan laughed. "The tongues are wagging. Little shit's messing with your head, remember?" He didn't watch Tienan return to his troops. His eyes were back on the beast. He remembered. En masse, the Delvers communicated more directly with the minds of their hosts. That girl, though, he was sure she was real. He hadn't even seen her until Lieutenant Royce had pointed her out. He heard the machine gunners open fire. Gunners is correct. All six of them aiming for the front legs, up near the torso. Suddenly, the air was filled. Just filled, doesn't need to be was. With the sound of screaming. Tuan thought at first that perhaps this was the chatter of the tongues, the beast lashing out with visions of despair. A spray of blood hit him, boiling hot, molten, pouring easily through the fabric of his uniform, eating into the skin of his chest and neck. His instinct was to dive to the ground and roll, but this only spread the burning mess further. So yeah, that was just getting rid of served to. But this only spread the burning mess further so that his whole upper body roared with the painful fires. Caitlin picked Tuan up by his legs and dragged him backwards, retreating with the majority of the front line. With most of the front line? Majority. Retreating with most of the front line. But the machine gun fire continued, and an arterial gush of the beast's blood caught her on the legs. With the noise and force of a landslide, the beast lunged forward, its reptilian head jabbing fast, mouth wide, one of its teeth shearing cleanly through the body of the soldier to Caitlin's left. She dropped Tuan and dove toward the fallen woman's torso. Caitlin's legs seared with agony, and her instinct was to feast. But the bitch cried for help. Can't eat a comrade when they're crying for aid. She grabbed the woman's hand and made towards Tuan. Her instinct is to feast so that she can fix herself, not just cannibalism. Her instinct was to feast, but the bitch cried for help. Can't eat a comrade when they're crying for aid. She grabbed the woman's hand and made towards Tuan. There was a strong breeze, the snap of jaws, a whimper, and her load was suddenly too light. She threw the severed arm downfield, grabbed Tuan, and ran hard as she could, hoping that she could feed them both before trouble came. I'll just be 1 second. I'm just seeing. Nope. Oh. My wife. Yay. Okay, I'll bring that chat forward, I think. How do I do that? There we go. Right. I don't know how to keep that visible. Never mind. Okay. Tiernan's platoon fared no better. 3 of his front line fared... What's wrong with that? Fared no better? Is that wrong? Fared... Maybe it is the wrong word. Yeah. It's the wrong word. Tiernan's platoon fared no better. 3 of his front line had gone down with the first hit of blood, the scalding clots hitting them full in the face. I don't know how to keep the chat open and have... Because every time... You can see what's happening. Every time I click on this, it's getting rid of the chat from the screen. Okay. Tiernan's platoon fared no better. 3 of his front line... Hang on a second. There's an easy way of doing this. No. Oh well. I don't know. There must be a way of keeping this to the top. Let's see. Window. View. I don't know. This is like the least professional stream ever, but what does it matter? Tiernan's platoon fared no better. 3 of his front line had gone down with the first hit of... Oh, there it is. It's staying up. Cool. Now it's working. Now I can respond. Hey. Yay. Tiernan's platoon fared no better. How many times have I read this? 3 of his front line had gone down with the first hit of blood, the scalding clots hitting them full in the face. They had choked and thrashed about. Then, in 3 quick thrusts, the bodies were lanced. Yes, I'm keeping the passive voice there. Through and scooped up by the beak of the beast's bird-like head. The head cocked back on its long neck, and the bodies tumbled to their end. It was so fast. That was what bothered Tiernan more than anything. He remembered the mythologue. When it came to beasts of the void, with the beasts of the void, he had a very different perspective. When it came to... With Beasts of the Void, he had a very different perspective from most members of... Yeah. With the Beasts of the Void, he had a very different perspective from most members of the battalion. He had been one of the worst beasts himself. He had been mighty, cunning, and ravenous. But he couldn't have been that fast. Stephanie looked through Danham's eyes, and Danham looked through hers. Always a step ahead. Always, it's very unusual. It can be unusual to start a sentence with always, but I'm keeping it. Always a step ahead. He could see soldiers' movements before they had even thought of them, and he was there with his beak or his teeth. Stephanie closed her eyes to it as best she could, but that didn't stop his eternal emotions, his wave of euphoria as he swallowed, or his horrendous hunger for wrath when he bled. She looked beyond because she had to, past the now, seeing the retreats, the fades, the advances of each platoon. Danham quietened. This was better, her way. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I can't even see where the stop button is.